Just assume two things. Assume you're going to die in 3 years for sure. You're dead in 3 years. 110%. You're dead in 3 years. And assume those two things. Now tell me how you're going to spend the next 3 years. Bilal at McKinsey needs to ask himself, was I born to be at McKinsey? Is this the highest possible level of service to my Lord and to humanity? Is that we are not taking God seriously. Yeah. They're doing that from a religious point of view in their mind. That is possibly the most irreligious thing you can do. There is no pathway, there's no decision, however painful, however difficult, right, that you will take for your Lord, except that He will not facilitate. So you cannot give a damn about what anyone else thinks, because that is a kind of shirk. That's a kind of ascribing partners to God. Money is an exchange of value. This formula that we've spoken about is the way that you're going to maximize your value. You will attract the resources.
Before we start this episode, I want to flag that only 5% of you are subscribed to the channel, so please do consider subscribing, as it does help out the channel and does help bring out better guests in the future.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, wa salatu wa salam ala Rasulullah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Iqbal Nasim is the former CEO of NZF, the National Zakat Foundation. He studied economics at Cambridge University before starting his career in investment banking, which he then left to start NZF. Under his leadership, NZF transformed how Muslims distribute their zakat, emphasizing local impact and institutional development. He's now the founder of Transform My Prayer, which helps Muslims spiritually connect with their salah, and the Last Day Leadership Program, which helps Muslims find meaning and purpose in their life. In this conversation, I want to discuss his journey from investment banking to purpose-driven work, what Muslims get wrong about zakat, and how we can live God-centered lives. Iqbal, thanks for coming on.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
All good. Take me back to when you're in your late 20s. You're, graduated from Cambridge in your illustrious investment banking career, working in equity research. What were the thoughts going in your head? Like, what was that feeling like, wanting to go into something a little bit more impactful, something a little bit more meaningful? Can you tell me about that time of your life?
Sure. So I was probably, around 26, 27. So this would have been around 2010. That I sort of started thinking about, well, is this really what I want to be doing? In a way, actually, I knew before I even went into investment banking that that's not what I wanted to be doing long term, but maybe in a shorter time span than I had expected, it was grating on me that, this isn't the most purposeful or the most meaningful thing that I can do. And I just always had this thing of, what is the most meaningful thing that I can do? And what's the sort of, way to get there? And I suppose having the risk tolerance to move towards things or leave things to get closer to what I felt was the most meaningful thing. So that over the course of 2010, early 2011, that feeling just grew and grew and grew until eventually mid 2011 I resigned from my role and then jumped into the next chapter.
Makes sense, yeah. Why did you feel like the NZF was the way you wanted to go? Like, was there like a specific pain point that you saw in the community? Was it something you've been thinking about for a while? Like, where did that kind of the thought process go from leaving your job to doing this?
Yeah, to be honest, it wasn't really particularly well thought through. At that point in time, I knew what I didn't want. So I think they call it an anti-vision nowadays, right? I knew what I didn't want. I didn't really know specifically what I wanted to do or how I wanted to contribute. I just knew that I might, it was just a very simplistic sort of, I just want to do something to, help the community, right? Yeah. At that level. I would kind of phrase it differently now, but at that time, that's what it was. So I became familiar with a few of the guys who were working in an organization called Mercy Mission. Mercy Mission was a charity that at that time was just conceiving of NZF. So it just so happened that in the middle of 2011, the National Zakat Foundation was launched by Mercy Mission as a project of Mercy Mission in the UK. And then things came together in such a way where by the end of that year, I essentially took over to run it. So it wasn't my idea. Okay. I wasn't the founder as such, but I was like the first full-time sort of CEO or at that point project manager, if you like, for this project of Mercy Mission. And then a couple of years later, in 2013, it spun off into a separate charity. And then I was a CEO for the next 7-8 years.
NZF has quite a unique mission in terms that, it's focused on zakat specifically. Yeah. As Muslims, we are familiar with zakat.
No, we're not really.
We're not. Okay, why not?
I think most people have no idea what it's for. I don't think, and most of how it's spent, I think doesn't really align with its actual objectives. But maybe finish your thought and then I'll...
No, it's okay. So tell me, what do you think zakat should be for?
I think there's three principles of effective zakat. One is that zakat should be localized. That secondly is that zakat should be centralized or pooled. And thirdly, the zakat should be balanced across different categories of spending. None of these are particularly radical. I would call them radically classical. They're all things that have a deep justifications from within scripture, from within our tradition. But if you look at how we do it nowadays, most of our zakat is not localized. It goes wherever else. Most of our zakat is not centralized in the sense that it is very fragmented. Individuals are just deciding what they want to do based on their whims and preferences at a particular point in time. I've obviously got countless conversations with people about their motivations, their thought process when they're coming to give it their zakah. And most people are very reactive, very spontaneous. It's very last minute. It just so happens which charity happened to turn up at which point in time or which advert they happen to see. Yes, some people are loyal to particular charities for particular reasons, and sometimes not really the reasons that they need to be loyal to them for. Like some people, go doggedly with 100% donation policy charities, which is not the basis on which to make a decision. So that's so what I'm saying. So there, what you have is a very individual, charitable kind of mindset, spontaneous, reactive, whereas zakat is more like tax. And so even though we are not here functioning within the context of a state where zakat has been organized at the state level, but we can as a community organize ourselves sufficiently to at least have most of our zakat organized, or if not all our zakat organized, on a collective sort of basis, right? So i.e., it shouldn't be up to you and me to be making individual decisions about what I feel like this year.
Yeah.
It should be up to a leadership that we are satisfied with to make those decisions on our behalf. That would be closer to the thing. So there's local, which we said we're not doing local. There's centralized or pooled, which we're mostly doing it in a fragmented or scattered way. And then there's balance, which is a balance between what you might call welfare considerations of individuals and what you might call broader community considerations. And most, if not all, of our zakat goes into the welfare, poverty alleviation side of things, but isn't really doing much. Although that's changing slowly, but it's not really doing much at the moment to support what you might call your leadership investment, your community development, infrastructure development type stuff, which helps the phenomenon of Islam, of submission to God at a societal level.
Yeah, I saw a LinkedIn post, I think it was last week, with the guys at IFG. They launched like a Zakat Impact Fund, and I saw there was a bit of a knee-jerk reaction from some people, just on like a specific thing, because I think they were talking about using Zakat money to help out think tanks or, some like political lobbying for like Muslims as well. And I saw you're in the comments, hashing it out with some people.
Sure.
Do you think it's just more like an education piece in order to kind of
that's
solve
what
it?
It is. Absolutely. It's education. It's also ultimately this question, and frankly, most of the questions that I'm concerned myself with, I'm interested in, are really questions of contextualization. It all comes down to that. It's not what did the Prophet do? It's what would he have done? It's not sort of even specifically what was, what's the verse in terms of what was the verse, what did God say? But what was it doing? Meaning, what was the intended effect? So there's this quote that I come back to. It's not very well known, but I really like it. It's a universal law is for lackeys, context is for kings, right? And so the idea is if you cannot contextualize a principle, you will never honor the principle.
Yeah.
Okay. And so I feel that not just on this topic, but on many, many topics, there is so far a maybe failure, maybe certainly just it's not being done enough, where we're not contextualizing sufficiently to appreciate, what is the right thing to do today in light of where we're trying to get to in the context of some future. And then when it comes to zakat and other topics, we're not, the thinking is constrained essentially. Yeah. So we're trying to, with all the best will in the world, we're trying to do right by the past or by some legal framework that we think is binding, but sometimes we lose that contextual thing. So I think there's more work to be done, more understanding, more education. Yes, people have it's natural for people to react sometimes strongly and maybe negatively to things that they've heard for the first time or they're not really used to hearing. But the principle is simply this, I would say, and it's best to actually summarize, like if you just want to summarize this whole zakat discussion, there is a famous commentator on the Quran, At-Tabari, who is well sort of regarded as amongst the greats of Quranic commentary. And in his discussion on the 8 categories of zakah, at the end of it, he summarizes it as saying that the point of zakah ultimately is saddu khallat al-muslimin wa ma'unatu al-islam wa taqwiyatuhu, which basically means dealing with the gaps that the community or the believers face, fulfilling their individual kind of gaps and concerns, and assisting and strengthening the phenomenon of Islam, right? And so the way to think about this ultimately is that institutional support, right? Okay, I can understand I give zakat to this hungry individual so that that person can go and eat, or this homeless individual so that person can now be housed. Now, if we think about institutions, then all of a sudden that's where the complications come in. How can I give zakat to an institution? But the way to resolve that in your mind is to just appreciate this, that you are not giving zakat to anything other than, again, a set of individuals or an individual, fundamentally, the leadership of that particular organization, to solve their poverty with respect to the work that needs to be done, right? So there's poverty with respect to your individual needs, and there's poverty with respect to, or need with respect to, the task at hand that needs to be fulfilled on behalf of the collective, essentially. And just like in any society, in any group, in any people standing for any kind of cause, everybody needs to contribute at some level, or there needs to be sufficient contribution from the collective to a subset of individuals disproportionately, in such a way that certain affairs that everybody needs taken care of, but doesn't have the time, or doesn't have to necessarily coordinate themselves to do themselves, get some people to go and do, so that the interests of the group are protected and advanced, essentially. That's really all it is. It's very simple. And so that's what we're doing. I'm not investing in a think tank. I'm giving zakat to the person who I have, is part of my obligation as part of the collective, to support this individual, to resource this individual, to so that they can go and do the kind of work that is in the benefit or the future benefit of submission to God at a societal and communal level. That's it.
What do you think zakat done well looks like for our community? We touched upon like the political think tanks, but across the board, say this zakat piece was done in the way that's supposed to be done. Like what does that do for our community?
Zakat done well means that there is essentially no one in poverty left in our community. Essentially, so that on the welfare level, it's not just relief, but it's empowerment. So that there is an economic empowerment such that for those people who need the support and in a desperate situation or a shock situation, that they get it efficiently, that they are then assisted to move to a situation where they can look after themselves, and where you're converting zakat recipients into payers, essentially. And then when this idea of leadership support and the other categories of winning hearts, which I think again translates nowadays to supporting the kind of people who are doing the kind of work that improves public perception towards the faith and the faithful, where essentially any project, any organization, any institution whose leadership is sincere and aligned to the cause of God on earth, and whose work is effective, that they are not is underfunded, essentially, that they have what they need to get the job done. As simple as that. So, and again, at the moment, it's entirely the opposite scenario. Like almost every organization that you could possibly think of that is important to our future and our present, either is underfunded or doesn't even exist. We haven't even seeded the thing yet.
You spent 10 years, I think, at NZF. Obviously, during that time, the organization grew. It went global as well. What led you to leave after 10 years? Like, did you feel like your work there was done? Did you want to go into like different kind of direction? What was the thinking behind that?
Yeah, so I'm always someone who's maybe over-obsessing about like what the most, the most meaningful, the most effective thing is that I can do. And I felt that in that journey of NZF, what I enjoyed most and what I personally benefited from and where I felt I was able to offer most value was in the sort of more educational side of things. As opposed to necessarily being the CEO. Like I could do the CEO thing, but I didn't particularly enjoy most aspects of doing the CEO thing. The part that I enjoyed was conceptualizing zakat, understanding it, framing it, teaching it, explaining it. And then, yes, like seeing how we could then take the theory and principles and apply them, into, or get them into the sort of the strategic sort of setup of the organization, essentially. So that's what I enjoyed. And then in that process, I obviously then started thinking around a lot of the salah questions, which maybe we'll touch on. And then obviously the Transform My Prayer course came out of that. And essentially, yeah, like I think that's really what it is. Where I am right now, essentially, is that I am, I don't have staff and I don't have anyone I report to. I'm a one-man band who just reflects, thinks, writes, and then, on occasion speaks about what I think are the things which are hidden in plain sight that people are kind of missing about how we're supposed to do stuff, and just reminding us about myself and then others about like just the basics, really. We're doing salah, but are we doing it in a meaningful way, proper way? There's a big difference between doing it outwardly and actually doing it. We're giving zakah, but is it achieving what it's supposed to achieve? Is Islam flourishing in society as a result of our zakah giving? And if it isn't, well, by definition, it can't at the moment, because with 95% plus of it is going wherever. So that needs addressing. is the way in which we interact with the Quran. Like, does that make sense? Like, how do we understand the Quran in our modern day kind of context, and how are we bringing this message of faith? How do we make it relevant and compelling for wider society, and even forget wider society, even for people within our community, because increasingly young people are asking questions about it that they didn't understand it. We're not framing things in a way that they could possibly make sense of, so they live this kind of double life. So these are the kind of questions that are of interest to me, and then that's why I'll write, I'll teach courses, I'll speak about these kinds of things.
What was that framework? What were those questions that you asked yourself, or those reflections that you had to figure out, is this the best thing I can be doing with my life? This is the thing that is going to bring me closer to Allah, because effectively that's what you're trying to achieve, right?
Well, yeah. So answer the question of what we're trying to triangulate between what is the most valuable thing that I can possibly do, stands high in terms of value and meaning as far as God is concerned, as far as I'm concerned, and as far as the people are concerned. So what is that? That's what we're trying to figure out, right? If you ask yourself that question, then essentially what you're doing is preparing yourself for when you face your maker, and if you are to be asked, okay, so what is it you're actually trying to achieve for me, right? You said Iyyaka na'budu, you said you alone we serve. Okay, so what? How? Right? And it just goes many, many levels deeper than this kind of just fulfilling certain rituals and saying certain dua at a certain point in time, and it's kind of this whole life kind of assessment, my whole life direction. So we are good at doing Islam at the edges, if you like, meaning we've got our lives, I've got our careers, we've got all this stuff, and then let me insert a bit of this stuff around just to have that part of me there. Whereas actually submission to God in its fullest sense is this: you alone we serve. So it's kind of, okay, how is my whole life like service? How is my whole life about God? Like that verse in the Quran, Inna salati wa nusuki wa mahyaya wa mamati lillahi rabbil alameen. The Prophet is told to say, indeed my prayer, my sacrifice, my living and my dying are all for God, Lord of all that exists. It's such an interesting verse, because if it just said living and dying, that would cover everything. But it started off with prayer, sacrifice. So get these things right. Sacrifice here is nusuki, is like ritual sacrifice, but essentially is an act of giving, right? So it kind of captures the whole notion. Like here you get, again, a sort of salah, prayer, giving type of thing. And then the whole of your living and your dying, like meaning up until the point that you go out of life, you're going out in an act of service, essentially. So for me, it was like, okay, well, given what my experience is, my few talents, my opportunities, the situation around me, the context, looking at the Quranic stories of prophets, heroes, and what they were trying to do, what mattered, like trying to just triangulate between all those different things, and then coming down to, okay, like actually I think the most meaningful thing that I can do is X. And at particular points in time that shifted, but overall I would say it's to help people lead truly God-centered lives where they feel that where I was thinking about it on the way, if I was to summarize in 2 words, it would be achieve alignment, right? You have total alignment. Like there is no conflict between your stated worldview and the way in which you've organized your life and the way in which you're living your life. Now, yeah, definitely you're going to have slip-ups, you're going to have forgetfulness, you're going to have moments of hypocrisy, you're going to have moments of like failure and all this stuff. But ultimately, like your whole life design is kind of moving, like it's all aligned to this point where you are going to stand in front of your Lord, because every single human being is going to face that moment, and that's your moment of reckoning. And it's just basically, why don't I just put myself there now, right? And then work backwards and say, okay, what's the thing to do now? Because ultimately, and it comes down to the name of that course that I teach, the Last Day Leader. Part of the reason why it's called Last Day Leader is because if today was my last day, or tomorrow, or whenever is my last day, like, was the trajectory that I was on the best trajectory that I could have been on? Not everything will have been achieved. That doesn't really, like, that's not even the most important thing, right? It's just what trajectory was I on? So I just want to know that I was on a good trajectory. That's all.
How do we translate this into, for like everyday people, they're in their corporate careers, they're Bilal at McKinsey and...
Yeah, Bilal at McKinsey needs to ask himself, was I born to be at McKinsey? Is this the highest possible level of service that I can render to my Lord and to humanity? And if it is, fine. If it isn't, change. It's just that simple. It's literally that simple. And yeah, it might be easy to say and whatever. Okay, it is easy to say, and it is easy to do for the one who realizes, because there is no move that a person makes for their Lord except that their Lord will, there's no jump that you make except that your Lord will catch you, essentially. Whoever relies on their Lord, then he will suffice them. It says the phrase in the Quran. So It literally is. I say to people, like, just assume two things, right? So to make it practical, assume you're going to die in 3 years for sure. You're dead in 3 years. You're dead in 3 years. 110%. You're dead in 3 years, okay? And you have all the money in the world for your personal needs. So you assume those two things. Now tell me how you're going to spend the next 3 years. That's literally that. So run that thought experiment, like get that down. Yeah, like what am I actually going to do for the next 3 years? Assuming that in 3 years' time, precisely, I will be dead. And in that 3 years, I have the money. I'll have the money that I need to take care of myself, my family, just for the basic needs and everything else. Now, what am I going to do? So now what does that do? It takes care of the two biggest issues that people have. They're concerned for their own personal, financial, whatever, and their assumption that they have long left, which you don't, right? So you should ask yourself the same question. Like, would you be doing this podcast if you knew for a fact you're going to die in 3 years' time? Is this podcast something that you want to continue? And if it is, great. And that's perfect, because look how important, look how meaningful that all of a sudden makes it. Like you are then at the edge of your possibility, right? And it doesn't matter what anyone else do or not. That's irrelevant, right? It's about you, your journey. So if it is, then great, do it and maybe even go all in on it. If I had 3 years, what would I go all in on? That's another thing, because I suffer from this for sure, because I get bored quickly. I'm interested in a lot of different things. So I move from this to this to this, and so. But I always advise myself and try to remind myself, and definitely tell others, like the more you can focus in on one thing, like the more likely you're gonna, if you dig one hole deeper, it's better than digging many holes, shallower essentially. So Bilal McKinsey and Aisha, wherever, right, need to do this thought experiment. Okay, now once you've got this, so you've got a vision for your life, free of constraint, then you look, and now you come back to out of cloud nine and you're looking at the drudgery of your current scenario. Then you need to ask yourself, okay, well, what's my next step? Now just take the next step. What's the next step? The next step. And one thing I have learned in my life is that when there is a will, there is a way. There is no pathway. There's no decision, however painful, however difficult, however seemingly ludicrous, right, that you will take for your Lord, except that he will not facilitate. What is the point of our statements around tawakkul and trusting and all of that? Like, our trust is really low-level trust. It's like kind of, it's really insecure actually, right? But we should find that iman is to find security in God. Faith is to find security in God, right? So just do. Like, you're going to die. You haven't got long, right? Like, what's the worst that can really happen? Yeah. Just get on.
Do you hear the last part you said? Like, if you really had tawakkul, everything's in Allah's hands anyway. So if you don't have that, then like you said, it's like a low level of faith if you don't fully believe in that.
Yeah, most of us are not putting God first, essentially. That's the thing.
Why did you think that transform my prayers, like the one big thing that you wanted to focus on? Like, why? I guess you thought that was like such a big problem that you wanted to.
Yeah, it's massive. It's massive. I mean, to be fair, I haven't I've not been that focused on it of late. Like, I've been looking at other things, but yeah, it's a massive issue. I'm definitely planning to revisit that and put more momentum behind that. And the issue fundamentally is this, if you want to summarize it simply, is that most people, otherwise educated, rational, intelligent human beings, conscientious, God-fearing, and who might apply a high standard to themselves in their lives, they day in, day out are saying things in the most important action of their life that they have no idea what they're saying. That, one of the most strange phenomena on earth, as far as human activity goes, is the average believer who, fits this profile that I just mentioned, continuing to say things day in, day out in their prayer that they have no idea what they're saying. And it doesn't even occur to most of them that there's even an issue with that in the first place until somebody brings it up and says, isn't it strange that you're saying at-tahiyatu lillah wa salawatu tayyibat, and you have absolutely no idea what that means, what it represents, and how deeply significant those phrases are. That's it. I mean, that is a shocking phenomenon. There is no other context of life. Like, I'm still waiting for someone to tell me. There's no other context in life where we would communicate, right, in a way, in a language we don't understand, and then try to thinking that we're conveying something or achieving something or experiencing something, and then not see a problem with that. Like, it's almost madness, actually. If in any other context, we'd call that madness. We'd call that some form of insanity. And it's very challenging, I know, to people when, the first time it kind of hits, right? And even for those people who are aware of it, and then they realize, actually, flip, like the last prayer that I prayed, like, where was I really? I was saying all this stuff, but what was I really saying? Was I really present? And being present generally is hard enough. But we are least present almost for the most important thing. And what it shows a person, if we're honest with ourselves, is that we are not taking God seriously. Like no one, I just don't see how someone who's capable of knowing what they're saying and feeling it, and they say I'm standing in front of my Lord, I'm doing it. I've actually turned up for this meeting, and I'm just saying these things, rattling them off. I'm not paying no attention really to what I'm saying, or have no desire to figure out what it is that I'm saying, so I can express it from my heart, right? And then that's just a total misconceptualization of God. Like you cannot simultaneously believe there's a real being, like a divine presence before whom you stand, to whom you're actually trying to get something across. You can't simultaneously, it doesn't make sense. So one of those, fails then. And what does fail is that, there's a really powerful phrase in the Quran, comes 3 times, وَمَا قَدَرُ اللَّهَ حَقَّ قَدْرِهِ, that they haven't given God his true measure. They haven't given him his true estimation. We underestimate, essentially. And I think in this case, we've misconceptualized. He's like this theoretical, abstract thing over there. He's not this real living being in front of me with whom I'm now communicating.
What's the solution then? Because I think in an ideal world, we'll know Arabic, we'll appreciate, the eloquence of it. Where can we start? Someone, for myself, I don't know Arabic. I know a little bit.
You don't need to. That's the thing. So you don't need if you've done even the most basic, most people now who are listening to this have probably done some basic other language thing, right? Like French or God knows what, right? And we don't even know why we've done that, right? I did a lot of different languages. I did French, Italian, Latin, classical Greek, I did Urdu and Arabic GCSEs as well. Yeah, anyway. So I was into languages, but you don't need to be like a linguist, All you need to know, can everybody here, a good test for somebody is, can I say Surah Al-Fatiha beginning to end in English without hesitation, right? A lot of, that is so crazy that most people can't do that.
Yeah.
That is crazy, right? And then, okay, that's level 1. Level 2, and then I would say that for the whole prayer. So theoretically, whether you should or shouldn't use English in the prayer itself is a separate question. We'll leave for another time, maybe. But you should at least be. Let's just say if you could, or let's say if it was understood to be allowed, let's say, and it may or may not be, whatever. But then you should be able to pray your whole prayer in English comfortably, fluently, because that's just a test of your ability to be with the words, right? Because if you cannot do that, there's no way you're going to be able to keep up with simultaneously kind of translating in your mind what you're saying, right? Going from the Arabic to the English, correct? Now, if I can say, so level 1 is, can I just memorize the translation of whatever phrase? Level 2 is, can I say the translation, now directing these words to my Lord with the emotion and the thing. Look how natural. I'm not trying to speak to you in a certain way in this thing, right?
Yeah.
But when I feel strongly about something or something hits me or whatever, right, then it'll come across with a certain tone, right? Tone. And this is something which is, no one mentions this about salah. I will bet that you've never heard anybody say, right, that consider your tone in your salah, right? We talk about melodious recitation, but that's coming from a different angle. It's from a real kind of thing. When you're saying certain words or phrases, consider your tone, because tone communicates. That's what actually will communicate, even in a whisper.
Yeah.
Right. Ask any lover. Right. The whisper can convey, right, the depth and the strength of that feeling. Yeah. Right. Are you married?
I'm alhamdulillah.
Oh, there you go. So you know, right? Well, we'll talk about that later, Sohaib. Yeah? So the point being is, so now, can I say it meaningfully? So look, even in Surah Al-Fatiha, right? In the name of God, the compassionate, the merciful, all praise belongs to God, Lord of all that exists, the compassionate, the merciful, master of the day of judgment. You alone we serve, and you alone we ask for help. Please guide us on the straight path, the path of those whom you have favored, not of those who've earned your anger, nor of those who've gone astray. Amen. Right? Now, the point being is that you can say that in a way. Now, I love this phrase, you alone we serve, you alone we ask for help. It's a great example, okay? Because basically, it's direct. So in Surah Al-Fatiha, it's where the addressee switches, because until that point, you're talking about God in the third person. Now you switch. Now it's the first time you're addressing him direct, right? So it's kind of an intensifying twist, right? In the chapter. And then you're saying, you alone we serve. It is such a massive claim, right? Anybody who is saying that, who is present in their prayer, you have almost got to pause just after that half of the verse, right? And then the second part almost is sort of responding to that in a way, but it's very different in its emotion. You alone we ask for help, right? If I come here, for example, Sohaib, and I say, if you're the great leader of the community, and I come to you and I say I'm here for you, I'm loyal to whatever you need, I'm here. That's a very different feeling in terms of what I'm communicating, what you're receiving, to me coming to you and saying, Sohaib, I really need your help. Now with God, it's both, right? So two different emotions going on, you alone, and now you can say that in a way that's really powerful and comes from the heart, or you can just say it in a way that's, oh yeah, you alone serve, you alone so help, and nothing really was said. So we say all these words, but I fear that for many of us, perhaps most of us, we're not actually saying anything. We're not actually saying anything at all, because the communication only lands to the extent that we were present for that communication. And there was an alignment between the thought, the emotion, the words, and then the relevant position or the action, right? So now when you've done that, now you start to alternate your Arabic and English. All praise belongs to God, Lord of all that exists. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Go back and forth 10 times, 15, 100 times. Just one day, stick with one phrase. Next day, move on to the next one. Next day, move on to the next one. And you'll build it up. But now you can translate your emotion into that, because it's not rocket science to know Alhamd means praise, Lillah means to God, Rabb means Lord, and Alameen is everything out there that exists.
You'll
right?
pick up as well.
You'll pick it up, exactly. So now you can alternate between them, and then cognitively, as you're going through the prayer, slow the heck down, firstly, right? Because if you go, no one, if you're doing that under your breath, forget it. Game over. Game over, devil 1, you 0. Yeah? It's over, right? So, but the point being is that you've got to slow down, right? One at a time, and feel it, each thing that you're saying. Feel each thing you're saying. And if this takes longer, and if your sunnah prayer ends up being sacrificed as a result, fine. Okay? Fine. Because trust me, Dhuhr time, right? 442, right? Mindlessly is way worse than 4 mindfully. So that's how I would say practically you do it. And if you go on my website, you find the course Transform My Prayer, it's all free, so you don't have to pay anything. Yes. And then you basically get this what to say in Salah PDF, so transliterations of the Arabic and the English, it's all there, so if that helps.
A lot's taken from me. We were just playing Dhuhr just before the podcast as well, so now I'm feeling a bit red. But
all of us, I'm not, I'm not, certainly has not perfected this in any way, but I know it's true. This, I have to remind myself of the standard. I mean, frankly, when we say Iyyaka na'budu every day, we lie. It's a lie. We lie. It's an aspiration, but why it's so powerful? Because it reminds us, right? You alone we serve. It's like, flip, man. Is that really, is my life really all about God and nothing other than God? Or if there is about anything else, it's only because I go through that first and then, do that thing, right? But so we do our best, and we have to evaluate. And like everything else, just apply normal communication principles and normal evaluation and monitoring principles and improvement principles to your prayer. The most important thing. And when that's in place, everything's in place, and your experience of it just becomes something else. And, thankfully, having had the opportunity to have taught this to thousands of people and having received ridiculous amounts of feedback as well on this process, anyone who goes through this process, and if you take this Transform My Prayer course, I can say not because I'm saying it, but because people have said it, it can definitely completely change your life. Because if you fix up your prayer, you are well on the way to fix up your whole life.
What do you think is the biggest mindset problem we have in the UK as Muslims?
Yeah, I don't know about just in the UK, but I think generally, I think it's this kind of dual or cognitive dissonance, is double kind of the split between what's Islam and Islamic, and then what's the world and worldly or life. I don't know, this is kind of, there's still this kind of split. And I still think that we're not, that's why, most of what I say, I always just put it in plain English. Right, I use English terminology because of the way we should say things and understand things in such a way that we can understand for ourselves, understand in the linguistic and cognitive frame that we use on a day-to-day basis for everything else, and in such a way that we could explain to others outside. Most of us could not explain. I say this, right? It's an assumption, but I think it's probably a fair assumption, that if you take the average adult Muslim in this country, you couldn't put them in a secondary school, right? A random bunch of whatever GCSE students, and just have them explain and respond to questions about what their faith. Why do they believe what they believe? How do you know God? Or how do you know Quran is revelation? What's convincing you there? What's compelling you there? How is that relevant to our lives today? How do we kind of, what are the core things from the Quran, right? That we can bring in that are relevant to wider society, etc. Most of us, we have vague ideas, but we're very insular. We're very internal, right? We have our own little lingo amongst ourselves, but we're kind of, I think, but then we do things when we sustain these kind of practices, right? We're let's say with the two core fundamental building blocks of the faith, the community, right? The whole phenomenon, the whole mission, right? Rests on salah zakat. Like any reading of the Quran tells you that for sure, right? And just these two building blocks are so off. And I remember, maybe I don't think about it too much recently, but I remember always thinking when I was at NZF, and later when this kind of salah thing came into my, more into my consciousness as well, I just sort of, and then I thought about this, how critical these things are. It's like not even debatable, right? Like these are foundational, like no one debates the fact that these are so foundational. But I'm sure you'd probably agree with me that in the grand, if you were to look at all of the stuff that is spoken of, debated, discussed, advised on, taught across all whatever social media channels and just whatever information and knowledge that people are absorbing, these two topics take up a very small proportion of the overall, right?
Yeah.
Like, and I just don't understand that. Like that is not. It just doesn't make sense, actually. It's like we're all debating whether the color of the curtains on the second floor of the house when there's no foundations to this house.
Yeah.
The house is on very weak foundations. And these, I think we don't have a priority thing going, I think. Look, there's a lot of positives. Like I'm not pessimistic.
Yeah.
A lot of positives. I think a lot of people are waking up to various things, challenges, looking at things, trying to approach things in a more universal way and with understanding. But yeah.
Well, why do you think that's such a big problem? Because I feel as if we're like continuing to like head more into that direction. I don't think like things.
Oh
are
really?
Like,
You're a negative.
I don't know. I feel like the way that you're kind of describing it, like that's just kind of the mainstream kind of view when I look at things. I mean, that's how I kind of see things. But why do you think that's such a big problem? If things were done better, like what would that look like?
Yeah, well, if things were done better, I would say that. Okay, let's put it this way: if things were done, what would it look like? It would look like that when you go to your local mosque for the Friday prayer, that you wouldn't have a problem bringing any of your colleagues from work, right, or the neighbors from down the street into the mosque to listen and to be present. Right now, I think most of us would have a problem doing that because we wouldn't understand that they wouldn't understand what the heck is going on because of the linguistic thing, the contextual stuff, whatever, and that should not be the case. Like that's just one example, right, of then where you can now apply that into a lot of different contexts. So how we say stuff, present stuff, explain stuff is done in a way that anybody can get and they find relevance in it. This issue of language is so important, I think. Like I often go on about it. And Allah talks about it, right? Like, وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَا رَسُولًا إِلَّا بِلِسَانِ قَوْمِهِ. We didn't send a messenger except by the language of his people. And language speaks to the actual language, the culture, whatever, from within. Min anfusihim, from amongst themselves, or min anfusikum, from amongst yourselves, or their brother Shu'aib, or their brother such and such prophet, from amongst themselves. We are still, I think sometimes, like we are here physically, okay, but mentally we're somewhere around the globe or in the past. We almost are kind of, I don't know, like it's like we're not really, we still have this outsider mentality. If we see ourselves as outsiders here, it doesn't matter how everyone else sees us. And it doesn't matter that we're mostly like brown or non-white and most of us are white. Like these are all like illusions, yeah? And they might weigh strongly for others, but they're not supposed to weigh strongly for us. They're just people, right? We're people, they're people, okay? And we believe something. And at the end of the day, as far as God is concerned, فَمِنْكُمْ مُؤْمِنٌ وَمِنْكُمْ كَافِرٌ, like from amongst you those who believe and from amongst you those who deny, right? Our job is to live true to God and to show the value proposition of submitting to Him, devoting ourselves to Him, and try to live up to the best of that in our own lives and to just convey and to bring that about in society. That's it. That's our job. Our job, if we are successful, would mean that at some point down the line, people would just be naturally coming into this faith. They will never ever be able to do that if we keep presenting it as something foreign, something alien, something inaccessible, something that's not for them.
Yeah.
And using language that does that and cultural modes unnecessarily that do that, right? Like I still don't get this thing about why are people still going around in thobes? I don't understand it. Like I don't understand it. Like that's just a good example of something which is basically. Now the issue is it's not because it's not there. People aren't doing that from a cultural point of view. Yeah. They're doing that from a religious point of view in their mind. But it's such a problem. That is possibly the most irreligious thing you can do. Yeah, I think it's the most irreligious thing to dress differently from your people for no particular reason. And then frankly, there's not even any following the sunnah in it because like that's not how the Prophet peace be upon him dressed anyway. Yeah. That's just how contemporary Saudis dress or contemporary Arabs, which is fine, Yeah. But you see, so these kind of like this. There's these kind of. But we adhere to these and I think that a lot of these things are signs of our insecurity because we need these markers to almost have a sense of identity. But that's not where the sense of identity sits and rests. The sense of identity for a believer sits in the value that they offer and the value that they bring, and how we bring people closer to this faith and to God. Ultimately, life is about knowing, going, and showing the way to our Lord. Right? That's it. Know the way to your Lord, go the way to your Lord as much as you can, and show it as much as you can. Facilitating access to the straight path and helping people stay on it. That's what our mission is about. That's what we're trying to do here, or we should be trying to do.
I have a question for myself. I've now handed in my notice at IFG, and I'm now embarking on my next steps. But I'm still in this like exploratory phase, like figuring out like what it is that like I want to do. How would you advise me in terms of like figuring out what that is? Because for me, like, I mean, the reason why I was at IFG, you know, the guys do good work, you know, providing solutions to Muslims, fighting riba. And similar to what you're saying yourself, like, I just feel like, you know, I'm at a stage where I can use my skill sets for something better. But I just don't know, like, what that is yet. But yeah, it would be good to get your advice from me.
Okay, so firstly, frame of mind, yeah? You have all the money in the world, you're dead in 3 years. This is important, I think. Like I said it before, it's very important. When you're going through this brainstorm thought experiment, you might, right? Like you need to literally convince yourself that those two things are completely true. Okay, you definitely are going to die in 3 years, and you definitely have like whatever money you need. So income, so that's not driving your decision making about what the most valuable thing you can do is. Okay, leave that aside. So now you say, okay, now what do I love doing? What is it that when I'm doing that kind of thing, like I just get lost in it, absorbed in it, like, and you can look at, and it could be loads of different things, just anything and everything you just love doing. And when you're doing it, you're lost in it, you enjoy it, right? And what are you good at? What do you feel your natural skills and, you know, your sort of superpowers are, or one or two superpowers? Here it's often best to ask others, because usually the thing that we are best at comes naturally to us, right? And so we don't think much of it sometimes. And so, but others see that as a distinct quality. Yeah. So you can sometimes, you know, friends, family, whoever, you can ask, what do you think quality-wise, what stands out? And you can obviously do your own assessment. So, and then like, what problem do I want to solve? Essentially, that's that kind of classic startup question. Yeah. But it's the same. If you're like, essentially, we're all, as individuals, you can all think of ourselves as founders of our own selves, right? Our own future self, right? You're sort of starting up or restarting up for yourself. So what problem do I want to solve? So, you know, ask yourself that. Now, if you can bring these things together in the context of what matters to God, right? So I want to solve a problem that's out there, means something to me, matters to God, and I want to do it in a way through a medium that I love doing and I'm good at doing, and I can keep honing in on, you know, bring that skill. Now, ultimately, this is the way to bring your uniqueness to bear. So all the things that are unique about you, right, will come to bear in this. You feel a sense of urgency and accountability because of this death thing, right? And you feel this death thing, and you feel a sense of freedom and abundance and the risk tolerance because of the money thing. You're not worried about that. So now you say, okay, let me put this together. Now, what does this look like? Now, if it looks like this podcast, doubling down this podcast, going for it, fine. If it looks like dropping this podcast, regardless of how I've started, so what? Just because this is a real key thing, just because you've started something, it doesn't mean that the past should not be the guide to what you now do next. I've gone on this road so far. Just because I've gone on this road doesn't mean now I shouldn't turn and go over there. I don't have to keep going because it's embarrassing. So you cannot give a damn about what anyone else thinks, because that is a kind of shirk. That's a kind of ascribing partners to God. Right? Because you're trying to figure out what the most meaningful thing is you can do. Why am I worried about this person, that person, the other person? No, I need to do the most valuable thing, solve that problem. So whatever it happens to be, things will come from that. Now, yes, there's iteration, there's experimentation. Like now you've got to start doing. Like some people get paralyzed and, what do I do? Right? And then at some point you just get on. Right? You start doing it, and then you'll get a sense for, do I really love it? Maybe you thought you'd love this podcasting, but actually you don't. Or maybe you thought you weren't so sure, but then you realize, wow, I really do love it. Yeah? You weren't so confident about, would you be good at it? But then you kind of realized, actually, I'm getting good at this. I'm enjoying it now. I'm getting in the flow of it, for example. Is it valuable or not? Are people benefiting, etc.? You make your assessments of these things, iterate. So again, just on this classic startup thing, right? Yeah. What is it? Build, learn, iterate. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Something like this. Yeah.
What do you think are some of the big pain points, big problems in the ummah that you think need tackling? That you would wish that more smarter minds would be going after these particular issues.
I think anything. What it is. I often get confronted with these questions around prioritizing of problems, and I don't think that's as important as that everybody just goes and solves the problem that they care about most. Because if everyone did that, everything would be sorted anyway.
Yeah.
What was it? There's this really good quote about this, but I'm going to completely bodge it, I think. Yeah. I think it's something along the lines of, it's something to this point, right? It's something like, it's not like go and ask yourself, like, what's the most urgent thing that needs kind of solving out there? It's almost, what's the thing that matters to me most? Because when you come alive, essentially, then you're adding your most value into the world, right? So from any individual's perspective, like, it doesn't matter if I said, oh, this XYZ issue over there, right, is the most important thing that we need more minds on. Well, it's almost no point me saying that, because like the people who care about it already, or if they did this thought experiment, they'd come up with it anyway, because that's the thing that they would care about. It's not like I know of a problem that others don't know about, So then they would care about it, and then they'd get on with it, and then they'd apply themselves to it. But what the shame is, or the shame would be, is that where people essentially are sacrificing the possibility of them applying themselves to these problems, or the highest value problems that they can possibly be tackling, because they're stuck doing something that actually they don't want to do, but they're only doing because they think they have time, and they are worried about their money. I think I just want to say one quick thing about the money. I know we're short of time, but because people say, okay, that's all very well, but how am I going to pay my bills, right? But one thing that people need to appreciate is that this formula, money is an exchange of value. This formula that we've spoken about is the way that you're going to maximize your value. You will attract the resources that you require, however it comes through, whether it's through voluntary giving, through paying for a product or service, whatever or some mix, or whatever the format is, right? Money will flow to you when you add your most value. Simple as that. So people are like earning livings doing all sorts of random stuff, right? Correct?
Yeah.
But they're doing something which is then offering a value, which is then perceived to be like something which is perceived to be valuable out there. So that will come, but you have to have patience for that.
Yeah. Just quickly, because we're about to get booted out, but what keeps you up at night? What's on the front of your mind? What are you thinking about these days?
Yeah, I think what if anything keeps, I mean, when I sleep very well.
Okay, then.
So what does keep me up is, yeah, like I do think about this kind of this vision 2100, right? That this idea, say in Britain, that the population of 80-90 million people, and we're 40 million of that 80 million, not just 5%, and haven't died out to 1% or less, but all of a sudden we become 40-50%. And I imagine that, and I think about that as a reflection of this verse about you'll see people entering into this faith in droves, right? Which comes to the Prophet, peace be upon him, towards the end. And then I think back from that and I say, okay, that's an outcome which almost none of us believe is even possible. But if we believed it was possible, and we worked backwards from that, and we thought to ourselves, okay, like what do we need to do now, right, to make that possible? That's answering the highest possible question I think we can actually answer in life. And so I suppose what I worry about is, what am I doing to possibly do my part just to contribute to that? That's it.
Makes sense, yeah. Iqbal, thanks for coming on.
Thank you for having me.